Hello folks, the Why Guy here again. Welcome to my home on this very beautiful winter day. The name of this video is called The Why Guy Explores Spiritual Warfare. You know, I initially started out, I guess, going to my first church I went to was called the First Free Will Baptist Church. And of course they believe that as soon as if you said a lie, even a little white fib, or whatever the case may be, and you died with that still on your heart or your mind or whatever, you're going to go straight to hell if you forgot to repent. Okay? Then from there, I spent time at a Southern Baptist kind of thing, which whole different Baptist. Why they call themselves Baptists, I'll never know. They're as far as the east is from the west, as far as I'm concerned. And then from there, I was invited to Full Gospel Businessmen, and that's where the evangelicals come in. So that was pretty much my bread and butter, the evangelical church. That's where I led praise and worship for 30 years. But you know what? And I was blessed. Don't get me wrong. I was really blessed. But the evangelicals have a horrible, horrible habit. Nasty habit of taking one or two Bible passages and then they build an entire doctrine around it. I guess all of them do to a degree, but all I can speak for is from my own personal experience, okay? Then they have the gall to accuse others of cherry picking or taking verses out of context. Yet that's exactly what was done with Ephesians 6:12. And that's what I'm going to get into right now with spiritual warfare, because you got to understand, I cut my teeth on quote, spiritual warfare. Okay, I've got 30 years under my belt of believing, teaching, endorsing, promoting that crap. And I'll explain why it's crap, okay? Well, this passage in Ephesians 6:12, this is the passage that they use to confirm spiritual warfare. This one little passage. Well, maybe there's two. Well, there's 1.5. Let's compromise, okay? I'll explain in a moment, okay? The passage in Ephesians 6:12 doesn't even include the words spirit or spiritual, war or warfare. It was never used, okay? Spiritual warfare is a blatant assumption, folks. A doctrine of men resulting in a false conclusion that's been jumped to, and I'll prove it. This is how it reads in the perverted Latin-based version. Quote, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places." Close quote. Sarcastically speaking, of course this would have to represent a spiritual warfare, since the previous verse 11 reads as, also from perverted Latin-based Bible, "Put on the full armor of God." That is true. There's nothing wrong with that. "So that you will be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil." Close quote. This kind of stuff really ticks me off. Because holy crap, what a lying, deceptive setup that verse 11 did, so that verse 12 would assume it's spiritual warfare. This kind of stuff, The word devil was not in the original manuscript at all, but was inserted to replace the word adversary. So before going any further, wouldn't it be wise to discover in context who the real adversary was that this passage was referring? Common sense. Verse 12 tells us exactly who it was, and it wasn't a stupid devil or demons. That's another one that they'll throw in there. Oh, this must mean what it means. Dante's Inferno, right? If a devil's involved, then there must be demons too. I can't help but to be sarcastic. Anyway, where was I? Before exploring the context, I should say, which I really want to get into, okay? Let's get into the history of what was happening when Paul wrote to the church of Ephesus, and it'll explain who or what the adversary was. Even if you don't even read it from a Koine Greek Bible, you still got to learn some history, but no, most Christians don't want to know history. They just want to know what they're spoon-fed. Okay? At the time that Paul wrote Ephesians 6, around 60 AD. An emperor by the name of Vespasian ruled, and he was worshipped by the secular citizens in Ephesus. A temple was dedicated to him and his two sons who ruled after him, Titus and Domitian. And I want you to note that Domitian ruled during the time that John wrote the book of Revelation. Okay? So the historian Eusebius reported that the Ephesian Christians were sorely persecuted during the reign of Domitian. Here's a quote from Eusebius. Quote, his reign was characterized by terror, especially in the latter years, close quote. Okay, the Christians in Ephesus, I'm sorry, I was thinking of the historian. The Christians in Ephesus were continually being transported, because, see, Ephesus was a port city, which is now in Turkey, and port cities, that's where, anyway, the Christians in Ephesus were continually being transported from that port city to the Colosseums so that the lions could tear them apart. That sounds pretty adversarial. Remember speaking, who was the adversary? That's pretty adversarial to me. That's only one historic fact. So how about another? According to Wikipedia, quote, Luke, Acts contains numerous references to episodes of persecution against Christians carried out primarily by Jews and Roman authorities. While evidence for isolated incidents have been found, there exists a great deal of historical evidence for persecution of early Christians by Jews or the Romans. Close quote. Gee, I wonder who the adversary was that these verses are talking about. According to the History Channel, that's online where I read this, it wasn't an episode that I wrote, says, first off, quote, the Acts of the Apostles, which tells the story of the early Christian church, contains a multitude of episodes highlighting persecution. The majority of these conflicts occur between Christians and Jews, though there are examples of persecution by Gentiles and Romans. You can find that in Acts 28:16. Secondly, the Roman court, I'm still quoting them, okay? Secondly, the Roman court system, and please, if you don't remember anything else in this video, remember the word system, okay? Features heavily in the latter chapters when Paul is brought to trial before several different officials, close quote. This is what gets me, folks. Every Christian knows about persecution, historically speaking, okay? Yet, they refuse to consider it while reading Ephesians 6:12 about powers and authorities. Are you following me? My reasoning here, where I'm getting at? So now let's combine history with that famous word, context. All right? Verse 1 of Ephesians 6. Now, we're talking about context. What's it about? Obey your parents. Obey your parents. Are they rulers, and do they have powers? Are they authority? Do they have powers and authority over their kids? Verse 2, honor your mom and dad. This just confirms. Okay? Why? They have power and they're rulers and they have authority over their kids. Okay? Verse 4, fathers should not provoke your kids to anger. Well, gee, while having a ruling and powers over your kids, while you're doing that, don't provoke them to anger. You following the context here? Verse 5, slaves, be obedient. I'm not endorsing slavery, but do slave owners have authority and power as rulers? Are you following me? Are you following Paul here? Verse 9, masters are to be good masters. Gee, masters, just the word masters in itself signifies rulers and power, doesn't it? The context of chapter 6 is about interaction between people who have some type of influence of authority in your life. Yet all of a sudden we're expected to believe that Paul, in verse 11, suggests that a devil, which he never wrote, has influence and authority in our lives. Are you seeing some perversion here? And people who scream context, are you seeing how they ignore their very screams that they utter? Okay, so let's ignore the context about dealing with people who seem to have some type of authority over us from childhood to adulthood and conclude that verse 12 is talking about a devil instead of people. which all the other verses before was talking about people. Ooh. I'm getting cold, so I'm getting... see, this... my anger is keeping me warm. Anyway, did I get that right? So here's the real answer. Let's first address the term not against flesh and blood, okay? The Koine Greek rendering completely clears it up, but let's use the perverted Latin-based version just for a moment. But before I go there, I have a question. Is the IRS flesh and blood? Do you remember when I asked you as my viewers to remember that word system? That word is the most important word to understand. Again, if you don't remember anything about this video, remember that one word, system. Again, is the IRS flesh and blood? How about, is the mortgage company or the bank, are they flesh and blood? Is the Ten Commandments flesh and blood? There's a reason I'm asking these questions. Is the power that rulers use? Yes, the rulers are flesh and blood, but the power is not. You follow me? Okay. In the same context as power is the world forces flesh and blood. Okay, that's spoken about in that verse, against world forces of this darkness. Okay, but aha! But aha! I got a new set of notes. Oops, sorry about that. What about spiritual forces of wickedness in heavenly places? Since the devil is invisible, then that must mean that the verse is referring to someone with something, referring to something spiritually, especially since the term spiritual forces in heavenly places is used. Before the Koine Greek explains this perversion, one would have to admit that everything thus far that's mentioned is referring to a system, and that's where that word is. And a system of ruling authorities is not flesh and blood, and that's what Paul was talking about. Okay, and I'll prove it. Also, please put in the back of your mind that the Jews considered the temple as a spiritual force and a heavenly place. They most certainly did. And the Sanhedrin and Pharisees were part of that ruling what? System. All right, now here's Ephesians. I got to read this to you. Ephesians 6:12 from the Koine Greek. Verse 12, because of us, the wrestling is not against blood and flesh, equaling physical bodies, but rather against the beginning controls and rules. Remember when I said the Ten Commandments? Not just the Ten Commandments, but all the rules that governing systems do, okay? Oh, rules. And it has in parentheses original rulings or rules and controllers, governments, and those things, people in the first position, the beginning things or people, the original ones, the princes, okay, and face to face with the rights and privileges, authorities, aspects from out, anyway, with a view to the strengths of the system. This isn't even in parentheses. It's actually part of the rendering. Oh my goodness, how do I do this? See if you can see where it's underlined. I can't even see my screen. Can you see the word strength of the systems in that? Oh well. Anyway, and I got another one I want to show you. Universal powers, the world's strong ones of this darkness, and darkness equals ignorance, facing toward with a view the spiritual aspects. Now that's where, oh, that's spiritual. Oh, there's that word spiritual. You said it wasn't in there, white guy. That's because it means breath effect attitudes or conditions and qualities of a spirit of the worthlessness, which means badness of conditions, unsoundness, and miserableness, among those situated upon elevated positions. Again, rulers and authority. I just want to point out one more, because everybody's going to talk about prince of the power of the air. Well, that proves it. No, it doesn't. It's not even in the verse. But I'm going to do a whole other video on that. But I just want you to see the word. This is out of Ephesians 2:2, where that verse has been perverted as the prince of the power of the air. It's not talking about a devil, but it's talking about a system. You see my finger? Gosh, I didn't even know. I can't even see my finger in the screen. Which one? Oh, that one right there, the middle one. Did I do that right? Anyway, let's move on because I'm about to close, ready to close here. So can't you see, by using the history about persecution by the governments that I shared with you, the governments and religious systems, how both in context is referring to people, not referring to a devil and demons and spiritual warfare, has nothing to do with it. Okay? Also notice how the phrase spiritual forces of wickedness in heavenly places, it doesn't even exist in the Koine Greek. Okay, instead, this verse is confirming that we battle against darkness, which means ignorance, against worthlessness, which means badness of conditions, miserableness, yeah, and against elevated positions, which is referring to ruling authorities of religion and government. That's what the whole verse is about, not spiritual warfare. Are you following me? And in closing, it's simply telling us that when we face these kinds of things, that the spiritual aspect, our attitude, should be governed by the Spirit. We must act upon that instead of trying to battle against these systems, okay, of authority that are not flesh and blood. You know, that reminds me, so often my wife, my very wise wife, will tell me, choose your battles and choose them wisely. Choose the ones you know you can win. You know, all of these people that are out there that are for a vaccine, that are against a vaccine, those are, there's portions of they're correct, both sides in some aspects, and they're delusional, some of them, and both sides of the argument are delusional as well as being truthful, okay? Because it only takes a little leaven to leaven the whole loaf and make it. Anyway, you follow me, right? There are people who are battling against a system of ignorance on both sides. They're not battling against flesh and blood. They're battling. That just came to my mind because it's so recent in our society right now. Well, anyway, scroll down to the Show Me More section and try to remember to give me a thumbs up for this video if you would. It helps the algorithms so that other people can find my videos. I've been told on Facebook that people can't find them. The less thumbs, the less people, the less that the computer will allow people, I guess. My ignorance, my darkness is telling you how to do this, okay? Anyway, scroll down and the Show Me More sections. There's 7 links down there. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel, consider doing so. As well as, I don't want to go any further than that. This video's been long enough. Thank you for viewing.